The Pacific War, which began on December 8, 1941, with a surprise attack by the Japanese military on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, United States. Why did this war, in which Japan and the United States fought for 4 years and resulted in millions of casualties, start in the first place?
In this video, I would like to explain from scratch the background and the course until the end of the war. It is content that I want all Japanese people to know, so that the same mistakes are never repeated. Please watch until the end. Going back a bit in time into 1914, a large-scale war unprecedented in history, World War I, broke out. While all of Europe was engulfed in war, the small island nation of Japan in the distant east was experiencing an unprecedented economic boom. Tokyo Station and the country's first skyscraper were constructed, and the nouveau riche familiar from textbooks emerged during this period. With Europe in a state of war, Japanese products sold rapidly worldwide, resulting in an extraordinary number of wealthy individuals. However, such a dreamlike state did not last long. In 1918, World War I ended, and in the following year, 1919, the Paris Peace Conference was held for post-war settlement, and a peace treaty was concluded. As Europe began to show signs of calm, countries once again began to advance into Asia, swiftly taking over the markets that Japan had monopolized. Looking at Japan's export value before and after the war, in 1913 and 1914, it was around 500 million yen. However, with the start of World War I, due to the provision of military supplies to Europe and the monopoly of the Asian market, the export value quickly increased to about 4 times that amount. However, in 1918, the war ended. And when the peace conference was held in 1919, export figures sharply declined from the following year. The economic boom until 1919 is called the wartime boom, and the recession after 1920 is referred to as the post-war panic. The 1920s, beginning with this post-war depression, were truly a harsh period for Japan. In 1923, a massive earthquake, the Great Kanto earthquake, devastated the capital region and claimed over 100,000 lives. An earthquake disaster occurred, leading to an earthquake panic, and furthermore, in 1929, the Great Depression, which involved the entire world economy, began with the stock market crash in New York, America, the center of the world economy, known as the Wall Street crash. As a result of struggling to somehow escape from the successive nightmares of these depressions, Japan ended up plunging into a disastrous war. Before the Great Depression, Japan's economic lifeline was trade with America, but when this became difficult, they tried to compensate by increasing trade with Asia. However, the European countries that controlled Asia, Japan lost its trading partners and became isolated. If things continue like this, nothing will change. To handle this situation on our own, we must expand our territory. The solution that Japan, driven into a corner, found was a policy of territorial expansion. Expand territory and secure resources and markets independently. The first target for this was Manchuria in northeastern China. At that time, Japan's territory extended from the north with South Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands to the south with Taiwan, and it had also annexed the Korean Peninsula. In such a situation, in 1931, Japan advanced its military to expand its influence in the Manchuria region. This is called the Manchurian Incident. After quickly seizing control of this region, the following year, in 1932, it was named Manchukuo.
It was made independent from China as a new country.
In response, China, which originally controlled this region, is naturally not staying silent. At that time, China was a country called the Republic of China, which became the predecessor of the current Taiwanese government.
Even though it was called a country, internally it was quite fragmented, like the Warring States period.
In response to the establishment of Manchukuo by Japan, the situation was such that they could not pay much attention to it. But in 1937, the country united against the common enemy, Japan, and finally entered into full-scale conflict, leading to the Second Sino-Japanese War.
The Sino-Japanese War.
It seems that Japan expected to settle things quickly and gain control of most of China, but in reality, it became quite a quagmire.
The ones who created that factor were the British, French, and Americans who were colonizing Southeast Asia and did not want Japan to expand its territory any further. If Japan continued to expand its territory, eventually their own colonies would be in danger.
Western countries, thinking this way, decided to fully back China. This route of Western support for China was named the Enshu route, after the then Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek, as a route to support Chiang Kai-shek.
In other words, at this time, it seemed like Japan was fighting China, but in reality, it was as if they were fighting a coalition of China, Britain, France, and America. Additionally, from the north, the Soviet Union and Mongolia were also supporting China, making it difficult for Japan to secure a victory. Even so, by deploying considerable military force, Japan expanded its control to this extent by the year 1940. Furthermore, and this year, Nazi Germany's conquest of France in Europe led to a rapid decline in France's control over the Indochina region in Asia. Therefore, Japan decided to advance its military in the northern part of Indochina, which was under French control, to cut off the support route. This is called the Northern French Indochina Invasion. After Japan seized control of northern Indochina, he decided to form the Tripartite Pact with Germany, which was achieving successive invasions in Europe, El Diarim, Tiatirqua, Dinaco, Shirokakura, Otoko, Tiapa, and Italy. As a result, Japan gained allies to counter the United States and the United Kingdom, but at the same time suffered a significant setback. Naturally, the United States strongly opposed this alliance and intensified economic sanctions against Japan. Japan relied on imports from America for most of its scrap iron and oil, and America stopped the import of iron. At that time, Japan depended on America for as much as 80% of its oil imports. So if oil trade were also stopped, Japan would be in big trouble. Japan then set its sights on Indonesia in Southeast Asia. At that time, Indonesia was under Dutch control. Only for oil with America, Semo, Poninjingu, Kono, Wanafunaka Womida. Even if the trade was stopped, they thought that if they could import oil from Indonesia through negotiations with the Netherlands, they could manage somehow. After numerous adjustments, at one point, this deal reached an agreement, but in the following year, 1941, negotiations with the Netherlands ultimately broke down, leaving Japan in a desperate situation regarding oil imports. The economic sanctions imposed by 4 countries surrounding Japan at that time. This sanction is referred to as the ABC encirclement, taking the initials of America, Britain, China, and the Netherlands. From here, they will move towards securing resources by force. In July of 1941, they advanced their troops into the southern part of Indochina, which was originally controlled by France. This is called the Southern Advance.
As a result, for Britain, the Netherlands, and the United States, it became a situation where Japan's advance was approaching right in front of them.
And in November, the final negotiations begin between the United States, which wants to stop Japan's advance at all costs, and Japan, which wants to secure resources by force, if necessary. The outcome of the negotiations was entrusted to two individuals, Japan's Kachisaburo Nomura and America's Cordell Hull. The negotiations between these two would determine whether Japan and the United States would head towards war.
At that time, in fact, neither Japan nor the United States wanted to engage in direct war.
Thus, for the reason, let's examine the military strength of each country, comparing the number of troops, fleets, and aircraft. Japan's military strength was 2,400,000 people, while the American military strength in the Pacific region was 2 million people.
The number of fleets, including battleships, aircraft carriers, and large patrol ships, was 37 for Japan and 25 for America. The number of aircraft was about 3,500 for Japan and about 1,800 for America.
But when comparing the military forces deployed on the Pacific region, Japan was superior to America, and at this time, preparations for war were not complete, so they wanted to avoid war if possible. However, looking at it in the long term, when Alisa could look at it, the difference in national power is overwhelming. Comparing the population, Japan has 72 million people, while America has 133 million, about twice as many.
When comparing the amount of money, here in terms of gross national product, Japan had 45 billion yen, while the United States had 530 billion yen, about 12 times more.
Regarding crude oil production, Japan produced only 300,000 tons, whereas the United States produced 1.9 billion tons, a difference of 630 times. The difference in national power was overwhelmingly in favor of the United States, and if it became a long-term war, an American victory was certain.
Therefore, at this time, both countries had a reason not to go to war. However, in such a situation, a final ultimatum from America's Cordell Hull was presented to Japan's Nomura. This is commonly known as the Hull Note.
If Japan could accept the conditions written in this Hull Note, the war could have been avoided, but the content was such that everything Japan had done up to that point would have been in vain, so Nomura could not accept it.
Despite neither side wanting war, negotiations broke down, and in December 1941, the Pacific War finally began.
The first to launch an attack was Japan in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in the US state of Hawaii. Japan launched a surprise attack on the American military base located in the harbor of Pearl Harbor, surrounded by beautiful seas. This is called the Pearl Harbor attack. This attack on Pearl Harbor signaled the start of the war, and the conflict between Japan and America began. With this attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese military succeeded in sinking 5 out of the 8 main American battleships. Moreover, the Japanese military was almost unscathed. Hearing just this, it might seem that the Japanese military's surprise attack was a great success, but in fact, the attack on Pearl Harbor is also said to have been a failure. But this is because, during the time of World War II, the most significant military power was not large battleships, but ships called aircraft carriers, which served as runways for airplanes on the sea. Japan aimed to destroy these aircraft carriers in the Pearl Harbor attack, but ultimately, they were unable to sink even one.
Therefore, opinions on this Pearl Harbor attack are quite divided. The Japanese military is
On December 8th, the Japanese military launched an attack on Pearl Harbor and simultaneously attacked another location. That location was the Malay Peninsula in Southeast Asia. At that time, the Malay Peninsula was a British colony. In other words, Japan was waging war against both the United States and Britain simultaneously. The attack on the Malay Peninsula also progressed quite well, and by February of the year 1942, they succeeded in completely controlling the Malay Peninsula. By the 20th, by the time May came around Nijunko, Japan had impressively controlled most of Southeast Asia, and when including allied regions, expanded its dominion to encompass this vast area. For the first 6 months after the start of the war, the Japanese military was in excellent form, but from a battle that took place in June, they rapidly began to lose momentum. The battle that took place on Midway Island, located west of Hawaii, became the turning point of the Pacific War. That was one of the fiercest battles in the Pacific War, and the first full-scale battle between aircraft carriers. This battle is called the Battle of Midway. Japan's goal in the Battle of Midway was to sink all 3 of the large aircraft carriers that the United States possessed. For that purpose, Japan deployed 4 large aircraft carriers planning to crush America at once. However, as a result, they only succeeded in sinking 1 American aircraft carrier, while Japan had all 4 of its main aircraft carriers sunk. Not only that, but almost all of the 300 aircraft deployed in the Battle of Midway were shot down, and what was most damaging for the Japanese military was losing all 300 of the ace-level pilots who were operating these aircraft. From the complete defeat at the Battle of Midway, Japan rapidly plunged toward defeat. In the month following the end of the Battle of Midway, in July 1942, they succeeded in taking control of the Philippines, but in the battle on Guadalcanal Island in the South Pacific, which took place in August of the following month, the Japanese forces suffered a complete defeat, and from then on, they were hardly able to achieve victory in subsequent battles.
And September of 1943.
Japan, which had been on the receiving end, decided to abandon further expansion of its forces, establish a defense line that it would absolutely hold, and focus entirely on defense. So, something else to say. This defense line is called the Absolute National Defense Zone. From this point, the Japanese military decided to totally defend this Absolute National Defense Zone, but in June of 1944, this Absolute National Defense Zone was finally breached. The island of Saipan, located directly south of the Japanese mainland, was captured by the American forces. The fall of Saipan was a significant problem for Japan. The American B-29 bombers took off from Saipan Island, dropped bombs on the Japanese mainland, and were able to return safely without refueling, as it was located at the very edge of their range. The fall of Saipan Island led to air raids on the mainland, eventually leading to the ground battle of Okinawa, and the atomic bombs were dropped. And finally, in August 1945, Japan faced the end of the war by unconditionally surrendering to the United States and the United Kingdom.
Thus, Japan became a defeated nation.
In this Pacific War, more than 3 million people were sacrificed, of which 2,120,000 were Japanese military personnel. And astonishingly, over 60% of those 2,120,000 war dead were foreigners.
I think these numbers show how reckless and tragic this Pacific War was. To ensure that such a tragedy never happens again, please remember this tragic history.
In this video, we trace the story leading up to the start of the Pacific War and the progression from its outbreak to the end of the war.
Yeah, it is a horrific event that Japanese people must never forget. To ensure that the same mistake is never repeated, I hope that as many people living today as possible will know this history. With that thought in mind, I made this video. If you liked this video even a little, please click the like button. Also, if you have any points of interest, please comment.